call to order the September 2021 meeting of the Finance and Operations Committee. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to those who are joining us via the live stream video and those attending in our boardroom here at the Twin Cities campus. We have Regents Davenport, Kenyanya, and Rocha via Zoom. Let me also welcome our student representatives for today, Gertha Run Johal and Riley Tuft, both who are from the Twin Cities campus. Welcome, and we look forward to getting to know you and working with you and your colleagues over the course of this year. Before we start our agenda, Chair Powell has an important matter of board business to take care of. Chair Powell, if you would please proceed.
Thank you, Chair Mayron, and we do indeed have a very important matter of board business this afternoon. On August 24th, Governor Walz appointed Bo Tau Urabe to the vacant at-large seat on the Board of Regents. Of course, that seat was very sadly left vacant after the death of Eileen Herr. We've grieved the loss of Regent Herr, but we're very glad to have Regent Tau Urabe join us and to capably fill Regent Herr's seat. At this time, Judge Tracy Smith will administer the oath of office to Regent Tau Urabe.
Thank you, Chair Powell. Good afternoon. Ready?
I am.
Let me raise your right hand, please. I, Bo Tau Urabe,
I, Bo Tau Urabe,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Minnesota,
and the Constitution of the State of Minnesota,
and will faithfully discharge the duties of the office of Regent of the University of Minnesota to the best of my judgment and ability. So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Oh, all right.
Oh, we got a few more pictures.
We're going to be taking some pictures here, and then hopefully our new regent will make the way around the horseshoe so we can all congratulate her individually.
Mine are all pictures of the computers. Little joy.
All right. Regent Tauyarabe, on behalf of the entire board, welcome. We are so very, very glad to have you join us. And maybe if you could take just a few moments to briefly introduce yourself to the board and to members of the audience.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. I'm testing out the mics for the first time, so thank you, Chair Powell. I first want to just take a minute to pay tribute to Regent Cully Eileen Herr, who was a dear friend and a colleague who we lost earlier this year to COVID. My appointment today, of course, is bittersweet because it's at her loss. And I am also mindful that it's trailblazers like Regent Herr who make this possible. I'm privileged and honored to serve in this capacity at my alma mater as a refugee child who became a first-generation college student. Getting my education here at the university really allowed me to change the trajectory of my own future. So I know that the university continues to do that for many, many people, and it plays such an important role in our state. I'm looking forward to serving with all of you on the board, working with President Gabel and the administration and all the chancellors, working with faculty and staff, and most importantly, working with students to ensure that we can meet the mission of the university. So I want to also just thank my husband, Dennis, and my sisters, May and Nu, who came here, because it truly takes a village and they make me possible. So thank you, and I look forward to joining all of you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you. And thank you, Chair Mayron. Thanks for allowing us this time during the Finance and Operations Committee meeting today. Back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Powell, and welcome again, Regent Tauyarabe, to our board. We look so forward to working with you. So may we have many good hours, good times together, and do good things. Our first item today is a discussion of the 2020-2021 committee work plan of the Finance and Operations Committee. As you will see from our work plan, there are items on it that we take up every year, such as the 6-year capital plan or the budget, how we get to the budget, the modeling of the budget, and ultimately the adoption of the operating budget. In addition, each board meeting, each meeting of the Finance and Operations Committee, we will be taking up certain items that have percolated to the top of our agenda that may be things that we don't always address, such as we're going to be talking later today. We're going to be reviewing principles having to do with the strategic property acquisition and sales. We will be, because of COVID, periodically addressing the impact of COVID-19 on our university operations. We will, in October, be looking at such items as the master plan and the dining program, which has been on the agenda and under review for quite some time. And I know everyone is anxious to see where we're going to land on that. We will be, over the course of the year, address other special items as well. For example, in May, we will be looking at the key cost drivers of the information technology infrastructure, which supports so much of what we do here at the university. So with that, I'd like to ask Senior Vice President Franz to walk us through, make any other comments about the work plan, and then we'll open it up to see if anyone has any questions or matters for discussion. Senior Vice President Franz.
Thank you, Chair Mayron. And thank you for that introduction. I think one of the things that is so helpful here is for people to see those items that come up that we'll be working on. And in the October meeting, I just want to make a couple of mentions. We have the campus master plan will also be up for review. So as is typical in the committee, we review in 1 month a proposal or an idea, and then we take action at the board meetings, or the committee and the board deem it appropriate at the next board meeting. So we'll be talking about both the master plan and the dining program, as Chair Mayron said. for review in October. Both of those, if the board deems it so, will be up for action in December. The overview of the budget model is another item we take up in October, which I think will be of really interest for the new board members to review how we go about budgeting at the university. In December, we'll again talk more about budget variables and levers that we need to address as we make these tough decisions. We'll talk more about the capital debt financing strategies. As we all know, there are challenges in university financing these days that we need to address going forward. In February, we'll do some more operating budget framework and analysis. We'll also do the annual report on the workforce and total compensation that we review every year. In March, the committee takes a month off. There'll be a board meeting, but no committee meeting is planned at this time. Then in May, I'll just mention one more item that we will obviously be working on the operating budget pre-review for action in June. So that is one of the really important parts of the budget process every year, preparing the review in May and taking final action in the June board meeting. And that's all I have at this time, Chair Mayron.
Thank you very much, Senior Vice President Franz. Any discussion, any questions anyone has on the work plan? All right, hearing none, we will move on to item 2, which is review of the President's recommended 2021 6-year capital plan and the 2022 state capital request. At this time, I invite President Gable, Senior Vice President Franz, and Vice President Mike Bertelsen to walk us through the proposed plan and request. President Gable, if you would like to begin.
Thank you, Chair Mayron and members of the committee. As part of Board of Regents policy, the administration is directed to develop a capital budget with a 6-year time horizon that is updated annually. Members of the committee, our 2022 state capital request continues to emphasize reinvestment into the university's existing infrastructure, and then it also defines projects and placeholders that advance MPAC 2025. What I'm about to describe to you will sound very familiar as a result. So we will describe in greater detail in a few moments, but the primary and first priority for funding is our HEPA request, which is at $200 million, as it has been for many years now. And there are 2 projects that are the remainder of the funding request. One is for the chemistry undergraduate teaching laboratory on the Twin Cities campus, and the other is for the design funding for the renewal of the science building we used to call the chemistry building on the Duluth campus. Both of those projects should be familiar to you as well. The $306.5 million in projects represent $271 million from the state and then $35 million from the university. So members of the committee were committed to working with state lawmakers and partners towards funding critical infrastructure projects like these across the state, these buildings and other investments at the University of Minnesota. We believe that a capital investment in the university is an investment in our state. It's an investment in research and innovation. It's an investment in the workforce of the future. So we look forward to advancing this important engagement in the days and weeks ahead. Madam Chair, with that, I'll turn it over to Senior Vice President Franz and Vice President Mike Bertelsen to discuss our request in more detail. Thank you.
Senior Vice President Franz.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, President Gable. Now, if you look at the first slide here, what we're trying to make sure that we follow, obviously, board policy. The 6-year plan is required by board policy, and it is the document that sets the direction for major capital projects. Because we have limited resources and limited capacity for projects, we must ensure that our highest priorities are shown in this plan. And as we all know, university priorities do change. This plan provides for more flexibility in the later years of the plan. 2021 6-year plan includes several placeholders that give university leaders opportunities to make strategic capital decisions that align with both the strategic system-wide plan and the current round of campus master plan updates, one of which we'll be hearing next month. The plan also includes a list of projects that are, quote, under consideration. These projects are presented to provide transparency on the major capital initiatives that are not yet ready to be included in the plan. Work continues on these. Some may continue to fruition and some may not, but it is our goal to provide this board with a clear picture of the broader pipeline of projects that may come before you in the next year or in the coming years. And finally, this is a tool we use to build future state requests and capital budgets. In fact, one of the major purposes of the 6-year plan is defining future state capital budget requests. We go to the next slide here. There are two primary forces that drive the identification of projects and the development of the plan. First and foremost are mission priorities. In this case, a new or growing or changing program might require something new or different in the way of facilities. These are gathered from our chancellors and deans and prioritized by academic leadership. Equally important are the facility priorities. In this case, the program may be fine, but the building itself requires a major investment to continue to meet the current needs of the program. In many cases, often the ones you see in this plan, both the building and the program require investment. In the end, mission and facility needs are balanced against available resources, both capital and operating, regulatory requirements, geographic balance, and other factors to arrive at the plan before you. Vice President Mike Burleson, take it from here.
All right, Vice President Bertelsen.
Thank you, Chair and Regents. The 6-year plan priorities were updated this year to better align with the university's new system-wide strategic plan, MPACT 2025. The priorities guide the selection and prioritization of our projects that will appear in the plan and those in the under consideration list. So next we will talk about each one of these priorities and how they are reflected in the plan. Let's start with the first priority, renewing high priority buildings to right size the overall amount of campus space. The university aspires to be and to maintain its role as a top national university and global university. And we cannot achieve or sustain that without making overdue investments in our facilities. To keep pace with the needs, the university should be investing more than double what it is today in renewing its physical assets. Additionally, we look for opportunities to remove space so that no longer is needed and to remain as a good investment. We have a large and diverse facility portfolio. 50% of our buildings are more than 50 years old. 8.8 million square feet of our 30 million square feet statewide is now considered to be in poor or critical shape. And that figure continues to inch up year over year. How do we get there? Well, dependence on largely unpredictable sources of funds that have not come through. So we can see on this slide, there's a lot of information, but an important graphic. Facility renewal is a recurring, consistent, and predictable problem as our buildings age and need more attention. Building maintenance systems, our buildings need maintenance, systems wear out, routine investments are important to maximize our investments in the buildings that we own and operate to maintain their functionality. What this chart illustrates is that we rely on largely unpredictable sources of funding to meet that need. HEAPR, or Higher Education Asset Preservation and Replacement, which is a category of state bonding, and as well as major asset reinvestment through the state capital request. The yellow range on this graphic represents facility renewal targets. The bottom line indicates the minimum amount of funding necessary to hold ground on our facility condition, and the upper line indicates the target to actually make progress and reduce our $5 billion facility renewal need. R&R, otherwise known as repair and replacement, which is an operating fund category of renewal, and HEAPR form the foundation of our renewal at the university, and we average about $40 million a year in that kind of spent funding. Asset reinvestment represents all other facility renewal. So if we think about mainly projects funded from the state capital request, like Pillsbury Hall, or internally funded university renovations projects like Lind Hall or utility renewal. Together, an estimated $600 million has been added to our backlog over the last 10 years. Some may look at our state request and think that $300 million is asking for the moon, but this chart shows that it puts us right where we should be from a request to catch up to where we need to be. As a reference for FY21, you can see on this chart, the gold is our annual R&R repair and replacement funds, and then the maroon HEAPR funds. Together, on an average, that's been about $40 million. Some years more, depending on the state request. The gray represents, again, university-funded projects. In this case, in FY21, it was a child development facility and A.B. Anderson in Duluth, as an example. We utilize many strategies to reduce our poor and critical space, but it's not easy and tough choices are inevitable. Our building by building strategy on the Twin Cities campus analyzes each building across several qualitative and quantitative measures to determine which ones we must prioritize as to keep and which ones have lower priority for the long haul. The plan is particularly useful in identifying, socializing, and limiting incremental investments into buildings that no longer have a long-term strategic value to the university. HEAPR is our main funding source for funding renewal, extending the life and functionality of past investments, and continues to be the most cost-effective approach. We have a large list of projects that we would tackle with $200 million, and in the end, the project list will be scaled to match the funding available. Our next priority is around investing in high-demand academic programs and mission-supported facilities. This is, of course, important and the greatest to meet academic programs' need as those priorities change and the need changes. The 2022 state capital request, as the president said, has some great projects that advance this priority. Specifically, the Twin Cities Chemistry Undergrad Teaching Project will provide modern space for collaboration, lab preparation, academic support to the university's growing undergraduate chemistry enrollment. Department of Chemistry serves students from every college on the Twin Cities campus, and greater than 10% of the entire UMN undergraduate population in the Twin Cities and lab courses will be taught in this proposed facility each semester. Chemistry space, or rather the lack thereof, has been a bottleneck for the university's ability to grow our STEM programs. In Duluth, the UMD Science Building renewal will provide additional active learning classrooms, classroom lab spaces, and state-of-the-art labs for a number of high-demand programs in the Swenson College of Science and Engineering that will include earth and environmental sciences and computer science. This project will repurpose the old chemistry building on the Duluth campus vacated by the construction of the new Chemistry and Advanced Material Sciences, or CAMS it's known. This plan also has several other high-priority university-funded projects, including construction of a new library collection facility to support the conversion of core campus stacks for better uses to support the strategic plan, as well as other examples that have been funded recently, including Lind Hall, which was funded this spring to provide much needed space for the growing computer science and industrial and systems engineering program, as well as the recent state funding for Pillsbury, which allowed CLA to vacate Lind. The next priority around advancing innovation in health sciences, agriculture, and biotechnology. This priority is intended to align capital investments with the university's larger long-term strategy of investing in core areas of research and scholarship that are dedicated to improving the human potential in the natural and physical world we live in. The plan in year 2024 includes a state request for the Health Discovery Hub, which we formerly called the Clinical Research Facility. On the university-funded side, key lab projects in Moose and PWB can be seen in the upcoming 2022 year to support health sciences renovation programs. An example of something recently funded includes the Microbial Cell Production Facility and the Masonic Institute for the Developing Brain. We learned through COVID that students want to be on campus, and our campuses and buildings are important places that play a major role in our overall student experience to be a place-based campus and experience.
Vice President Bertelsen, maybe who's ever running the slides, I think we're one slide behind.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. I missed. Thank you.
For everyone who's watching on live streaming, let's move on.
Now we're caught up.
There we go.
Thank you. On the Twin Cities campus, we anticipate investments in student unions, both in Minneapolis and in the St. Paul campus in 2022 and 2023 to address needs and long-term space needs. The Wilson Library project in 2025 is intended to replace stack space vacated by the proposed collections facility with a new undergraduate learning commons that includes flexible teaching, learning, and collaboration spaces. And lastly, under consideration list includes several other projects, including the renovation of Morrill Hall, provide additional student-centric programming, and a renovation of the Kirby Student Center in Duluth to provide improved space for student programming and active student spaces, study spaces. Our next and last priority, this focuses on many ways that we change the physical campus to make the university campus more welcoming and foster a sense of belonging and improve accessibility to the daily life. This priority is less about any specific project as opposed to how we take this opportunity and weave it into every project that we do across the campus. As a university, we need to seek opportunities to make our campus unique and special in the digital world. We want everyone to feel welcome and safe where they are. Typically, smaller projects that may not rise to the 6-year plan threshold include things like lighting and the Church Street corridor. I'd like to transition now to the 2022 state capital request. We saw this in June earlier as a preliminary state request. Region policy requires that you approve our capital request to the state. The request here in this month is for review, and we'll be back in October for your action. The 3 items are the $200 million for HEAPR, which is 100% state funded. Second, as we've talked about, is the chemistry teaching, undergrad teaching for the Twin Cities. This project will renovate the 95-year-old Fraser Hall and replace obsolete portions with a new 5-story addition to create a 117,000 square foot modern teaching lab in the Twin Cities campus. The building's 18 active learning laboratories will provide space for collaboration, lab prep, academic support for U of M's undergraduate chemistry lab enrollment growth, and funding for design was provided in the 2020 bonding bill. And the last project is the Duluth Science Building renewal, pre-design and design to complete renovation of the outdated 70-year-old chemistry building on the Duluth campus to serve other high-priority science and technology programs that we've already discussed. Finally, in summary, this slide shows a cumulative investment across the 6-year plan. This summary includes state request projects as well as university-funded projects. It does not, in this chart, include the university-funded R&R repair and replacement that comes through the annual operating budget. With that, Madam Chair and members, we are prepared to take any of your questions.
All right, thank you, President Gable, Senior Vice President Franz, and Vice President Bertelsen. I would just note that Fraser Hall has morphed over the years. Back in the 70s, when I was in law school there, it was the law school, and then moved on to other things and hopefully bigger and better things in the future. So thank you for the presentation. At this time, I would open this item up for any discussion. This is for review only, not vote. So any questions that you have for any of the presenters, this is the time. Yes, Chair Powell.
Thank you, Chair Mayron, and thank you for the presentation, Vice President Bertelsen. So just, reflecting that over the last couple of years, we have a new strategic plan. We're also well on our way in sort of the master campus plan, which I would guess has triggered some rethinking of what's showing up on the 6-year plan. We don't compare from year to year, but I'm wondering if you just give us a sense of what are some of the, if you will, emerging priorities in light of all the other strategic work that's been done. You mentioned the Masonic Institute, I think is clearly on the list now, BioMaid opportunity, but any other sort of, if you will, newer things on the list that we should be aware of? I think you also touched on Wilson Library, but I don't know. I'm just trying to get a sense for how it's evolved over the last year or two.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Regent Powell, and I'll certainly welcome any other input from leadership here as well. A couple points. One is a consistent theme for the 6-year plan is we have more specificity in the early years. And certainly those are projects that have been on the list for a while and move closer and closer. So we really have kept those projects that have been identified and designed in their place. The biggest impact of the strategic plan and the now developing master plan will be really the years 3, 4, 5, and 6. And so as you look at this plan, we have a series of, in anticipation of that input, have kept a series of placeholders that are not project specific, but leaving room for those plans to help guide the next step. So we have added some things, and you've identified some of those. President Gable had identified how do we focus, make sure we're making student focus and student centric spaces in the center of campus. That has us thinking, and you'll see in the master plan consideration for future renovations of Appleby and Morrill Hall. Also has been on that list for some time is a conversation about when is the right time to talk about the Armory and the former Bell 10 Church. So those are kind of 4 campus core areas. Also student-centered focus areas have been that are emerging and will be in more specificity soon will be articulation of the student unions, both in St. Paul and Minneapolis, and what's next for each of those. I think In addition to that is sort of the next unfolding kind of conversation is the future of office work on campus, which is of course changing for all of us as we speak. And we are, like everyone else, trying to understand what that means and adapt to that. And how do we design buildings more flexibly? And probably the last is how to make those investments in places where is our science capacity holding us back and creating bench and limitations. And I think both the chem teaching and the chemistry project at Duluth continue to advance as priorities. So others may have things they want to add to that.
Vice President Franz, you wanted to add something?
And thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Vice President Berthelsen. Chair Pell, I think one of the things, we are hearing a lot about infrastructure these days, right, at the national level. And that debate's been going on for a long time, and it's been going on a long time at the state level too. One of the things that we really want to make sure that we build into this plan is the ability to listen and adapt. The master plan that we'll be discussing next month to the board is one of those opportunities where we can get more information from the university community at large and from the board about some of the priorities and ideas that may have changed now based on COVID, as Vice President Berthelsen said, and other important areas. So this area, the infrastructure area, is just very dynamic and changing a lot. We need to really make sure our requests to the state are fine-tuned, and as we hear from the state, more and more their opportunities are going to fixing up what we have as opposed to new projects. So those are all fitting into the mix.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Any follow-up? All right, Regent Farnsworth.
Thank you, Chair Mayron. And just one comment. Wanted to thank the presenters for kind of laying out these plan priorities very clearly. I think this is really helpful understanding that we're at the beginning of these conversations, but instead of just looking at a long list of detailed and relevant information, obviously within a capital plan, actually understanding the priorities and making it more digestible, at least for me, was really helpful. Speaking of the priorities on, let's see, page 46 of the docket. So priority number 2, investing in high demand academic programs and mission support facilities. Kind of like what was just recently said around that there's new conversations around office space on campus. Very understandably, I'm particularly interested in the same type of conversation, but around classroom space, and whether that looks like having keeping the same amount of labs, because obviously there's a lot of things that happens in labs that's not easily transferable to other spaces. But maybe does that look like having less large lecture spaces? So just kind of curious to hear a little bit more about that, and then just because it's on my mind. After our tour of Pillsbury Hall yesterday, I think Regents Powell, Hipsch, and Rocha would agree that if our capital projects continue to look as amazing as that, we're in good shape. So just wanted to put that shout out for the record as well, because it was on my mind after our tour yesterday. But yeah, I'm interested in a little bit of commentary on the academic space side of the conversation. Thank you.
Madam Chair and Regent Farnsworth. So maybe to address classrooms first. And one of the surprising facts for people is that of all of our space, only 4% of our space is actually classrooms. So our classrooms are one of the best managed and highest utilized in the country. A shout out to our classroom management group, who has great track record and benchmarks, if you want to go see their website. And so we have a very highly utilized and very centrally scheduled, though flexible, use of those rooms. And so we get a great deal of use from that, even though it's a small percent of the space. I'd say the reinvestment in that, we continued the ongoing transformation to how do we engage technology in those classrooms, in a shift to more and more active classrooms, and the setting is a bit more of a flat and adaptable, where students can move tables and have a lot of engaging with their technology, as opposed to kind of the larger amphitheater seats. Those have a role as well for certain kinds of classes, but we're seeing that transformation in how professors teach and students are learning, and how that's changing the classroom environment.
Any follow-up, Regent? Thank you. Thank you, Vice President Berthelsen. Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is sort of a laser focus type question. Within the last several years, we've talked about renovation to the Armory, one of the older buildings on campus. And I know that there was some money for kind of review, and I don't know how close it was into the plans side of things. It's an important facility. At this point, having seen the remarkable work done on the Pillsbury building, it's kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum as I recall from my last visit, but clearly an important program. It's part of our federal relationship and funding, and it's been a pretty important building both for opportunity for a diverse community as well as part of our role in national defense. And then also I think the building provides support for post-secondary option, which I think is critical because as we have some of the top high school students in the state using the university, it'd be nice to certainly have them in top-notch facilities. Wondering what the status of that is, and if it's, I looked through the materials, I didn't see it specifically mentioned, but perhaps it's part of a larger group of exploration. But I think that's been about 5-6 years that we've been talking about that in earnest and wondering what the status is.
Vice President Burleson, are you able to respond to that?
Yes, Madam Chair and Regent Rocha. Yes, the Armory continues to be in a priority of focus for us when we're thinking about capital needs. And I agree with your assessment as to the facility condition. It's sort of like Pillsbury was. It's certainly an opportunity for much greater use of a building that someday will look great. And just trying to find the right time and priority. So when we look at the state request, we have the identified in 22 and 23 the chem teaching and the health hub, or formerly CRF, in 22 and then 23. You can see in the 6-year plan, starting in 24, really through the 26, we have what we call strategic placeholders. And so one of the things that we're trying to figure out is the dominoes. As we've talked yesterday on the tour, often projects, it's not just one project, it's how they fit in a series of dominoes, as how we ended up with Pillsbury at the end of a series of projects in a row that enabled the next. We're trying to identify how the Armory fits in those kind of priorities and dominoes and what other things. So we're looking for information that I think in your feedback as a board from what comes out of the master plan and the conversations the next couple months. And that will help inform really the next 6-year plan, where I think we'll have to be much more specific on laying out what are currently placeholders for 24 through 26.
Madam
Thank
Chair.
you. Any follow-up, Regent Rocha?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the answer, Vice President Burleson. But again, it doesn't really move us much closer. And one of the challenges I think for that particular facility is both between the PSEO administrative presence and with the ROTC programs. They don't, they're not. Obviously, there's a lot of transition of the people that are in those positions, as opposed to an academic unit that has, I think, a bit of a longer relationship and perhaps able to follow through a little bit better. Speaking on behalf of my own opinion here, and I'm very interested in what other members of the board think about this, but I think it should be a priority. Would be happy to work with the administration to the extent that I'm able, in terms of even finding some other opportunities for support, whether it's federal investment or even state National Guard type investment. There are some facility coordination opportunities there, I think, that could be there as well. But based on the last 6 years, I think we need to make it a priority. Otherwise, I think 6 years from now we'll be having the same conversation. So again, interested in what my colleagues think, and any opportunity we have to move this forward, I would strongly support. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Rocha. Regent Swigum?
Madam Chair, thank you. VP Burleson, can you tell me what our bond rating is right now at the university? Are we AAA?
Senior Vice President Franz.
Madam Chair, Regent Swigum, we are AA plus, or AA.
AA?
I think, I believe plus. Oh, here's a guy who can tell you.
We're going to hand this off to someone who really knows. All right.
Chair Mayor and Regent Spigham, we are AA1, which is one notch below the state.
Okay, double A, is it, I've never heard double A1. That's double A plus, is that then? That's
Roughly,
how
yes.
I've
It's
heard.
one notch below the state. There are 3 different rating agencies that each have their own sort of scheme. The AA1 is the Moody's rating.
Right. And Mike, do you go to New York once a year to meet with the bond?
Yeah, we Chair, Regent Sviggum, we meet with rating agencies every time that we issue debt, which is about once a year. And if we're doing it more frequently, we do go to New York and kind of do the dog and pony show. with
You make the
rating
trip
agencies.
once a year then. What total capacity, and I don't know if I should ask VP France, Mike? Well, what would be our total capacity for bonding and to maintain that AA plus, AA1 rating?
So Chair Maron and Regent Sviggum, that's a really good question and a very difficult question because the rating agencies look at about a half a dozen different factors and use some black magic to come up with sort of what they think our rating should be. So it's not easy to say if we add X amount, we go to AA2, or if we take away. So it's sort of a black box almost. Having said that, I believe in the materials, there was one slide that showed debt capacity. And if not,
We didn't
we didn't include that. I can get that for you tomorrow. We typically look at about 1.8 to 2 billion as our total theoretical capacity. Right now, we're at about 1.4 billion of debt. So we have capacity. Keep in mind also that every year we pay off $80 to $90 million of debt just normally as part of our amortization. So when you look at a year where you're adding, let's say 150 to 2 million, but you're paying off almost half of that, the incremental impact is pretty small.
Okay. So if I hear you correctly, I think we have about 400 million of capacity there at this point, 1.4 to the 1.8.
Give or take 100 million, sure, yes.
Pretty soon they're going to be farmers Regent Hips talking that kind of money. I do have a couple more questions.
All right.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
As I
and then
follow
we're gonna
up,
bring
because
this down.
I'm leading to the fact, stay there, please.
Hang in here, bro.
I'm leading to the point that I think we're going to have to be using more of our own debt capacity and doing more of this work ourselves. Because folks, very honestly, the last bonding bill that passed the state, we got a historically low percentage of that bill. Generally, the university is somewhere in the neighborhood of 14 to 18% of the bill. Of the bonding bill. The bill was so big last passage that I think we were at about 6.5% to 7%. Is that correct, Mike?
Yes.
Which means to me that we're going to have to, I have no qualms, no problems at all with our priority and our need. I think the priority we have down here is absolutely correct. And the need is even greater than being correct. But I'm afraid we're going to have to be doing more of it ourselves if we're going to keep up with the need that is out there, at least based upon the last bill. I know it was touted by many, but I look at it from a historical percentage and it was very low, if not the lowest I've seen in a bonding bill. Do we have enough flexibility in this 6-year plan to do something dramatic or ask the state for something dramatic to, we had a retreat and Regent Hips just got all excited when he heard about $1.7 billion for our clinic. What? Billion. I said billion, didn't I? In fact, you said you would go to every Lions Club and Rotary Club in the state, did you not?
Club, yeah.
You committed to do that. If that were to come forward somehow or another in the next year or 2 or 3 in planning, do we have the ability to be flexible enough to ask for the state for significant help in that area?
I'm going to defer to my boss on this one.
Franz, or do you want to turn it over you want to hand this question off to a friend?
I'll try,
All
Madam
right.
Chair, Regent Sviggum. The answer is yes. In fact, in December, I think this is important to read this. We're going to have a discussion of capital and debt financing strategies here in the committee in December. Committee will discuss potential capital and debt financing strategies. The presentation will include an overview of the university's current strategies and debt capacities before seeking input on potential strategies and opportunities given current market trends. So you're asking exactly the right question at the right time. I think we have to consider other alternatives because going back to the well the way we have has not been working. And we have really dramatic needs that we need to figure out ways to be more creative about addressing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's fine.
Thank you. One more question, and that comes from Regent Kenyanya, who is on Zoom, and then we will move on. Regent Kenyanya.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and VP Bertelsen for the presentation. I have a quick comment, free to react to it or not. When you said that 4% of our space is classroom, I think I've heard that stat before, but I think it just catches me every time. I mean, that truly is remarkable. Obviously speaks to the efficiency, but at the same time, I think it speaks to how much other space we use, right? And I don't know what that makeup is, but I imagine a good chunk of that is office space, right? And other working space. And I know you already touched on this in the presentation. Also looking ahead to the next presentation, there's a mention of flexible work, whatnot, and there's a mention of right sizing in this one. In the scope of the 6-year capital plan, I mean, I don't think we have to focus on that too much, but just looking at the committee work plan, knowing that the master plan will be coming, I believe in October for review and then action in December. I think if we don't have some more clarity into what that flexible work looks like, right, and what office space utilization will be like going forward, I think it'll be pretty hard to concretely action on a master plan. Obviously, those are malleable and somewhat and can be changed, but just wanted to echo that. I'm glad that you brought up those points, and they're good for consideration here, but I think they're much more germane to the master plan, and hopefully we'll have more clarity about what that will look like before we make action on that. Thank you, Madam Chair, VP Bertelsen.
All right, thank you, Regent Hipsch, and then we will conclude this topic.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and I have to go back to, I agree with Darren Rocha, or Regent Rocha, that we need to do something with the Army sooner than later. I agree with that, and I also really on board with Regent Swigum and his comments on looking for new money. I think right now we're living off our depreciation, and we need to be looking at new sources of funds, and we're at historically low interest rates, and now is a good time. So we can't just keep using it up, I guess. We're gonna have to figure out other methods, so.
All right, well, thank you very much. I think this was an excellent discussion on this very important topic. We will be taking up the capital plan next time for action. At this time, we will move to item 3, which is principles to guide strategic property acquisition and sales. And Senior Vice President Franz and Assistant Vice President Leslie Krieger will address this issue and tee it up for us. Senior Vice President Franz.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and see Assistant Vice President Krieger here. Thank you. Over the past 2 years, the administration has brought to the board several real estate transactions, both acquisitions and dispositions, that have triggered broader policy discussions regarding the university's approach to its real estate holdings. Today, we are here to discuss with you draft principles that guide our strategic real estate decisions. We're reviewing these with you today in preparation for your October review of the Twin Cities Campus Master Plan, with the intention that we would refine the draft principles based upon your guidance here today, and if desired by the committee, we could return as a proposed amendments to the Board of Regents policy on property and facility at a future meeting after consultation with the university committee, the community. Let me start though by a little bit of background before we get into this. As we all know, there's a need for more intentional discussion that's been highlighted before, and it's clearly part of our action steps in Impact 2025. And it is directly aligned with the Campus Master Plan update process. Our long-range plans are a major driver of our real estate decisions. Just for a little bit of context, on the upper part of this slide, above the state-owned trust lands, which is 28,000, Those categories add up to 28,500 acres. So that the university currently has land holdings consisting of 28,500 acres of land across the state of Minnesota. And in addition, there are over 28,000 acres of state-owned trust land. Our system campuses account for over 2,000 acres. Our research and outreach centers account for almost 17,000 acres. And other facilities such as the laboratory in Ash River or the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum or the Sanders Crop Research Center in Redwood Falls, Itasca Biological Station, Cedar Creek Ecosystem Science Research account for over 9,000 acres. All of these lands are situated within the traditional homelands of the Dakota and Ojibwe, and scores of other indigenous people who have walked on these lands from time immemorial. It is important to acknowledge the peoples whose land we live, learn, and work as we seek to improve and strengthen our relations with the 11 sovereign nations of Minnesota. I will now turn it over to Assistant Vice President Krieger to review the draft strategic real estate principles.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Vice President Krieger.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Each time the university considers a real estate acquisition or disposition, we start by asking the question, what is the strategic value to the university? But in fact, there are a number of factors that play into that strategic value of a property acquisition or disposition, and we've attempted to boil these down to 4 draft guiding principles for your consideration today. These are: support the university's mission and align with the system-wide strategic plan, align with campus master plans, provide strategic value when balanced against scarce resources and minimize financial liability, and positively impact areas adjacent to the university or limit negative impact. In developing these principles, it's important to strike a balance between providing high-level, memorable strategic direction, but enough detail to actually provide guidance to decision-making. And as a result, each principle includes language that articulates its meaning in further detail. For example, acquisitions must support the university's educational, research, or service mission, either directly or from mission-supporting activities and infrastructure. Dispositions may occur when it is determined that the real estate is no longer required to fulfill the university's mission, or the disposition of real estate better meets the university's needs or better supports the university's mission. Future acquisitions and dispositions should be contemplated in the campus master plans. Priority consideration will be given for expansion at the edge of the existing campus or for properties within campus boundaries as identified in the campus master plan. Sites that are not adjacent to the core of campus or other university properties will be prioritized based on access, such as transit, bike, or pedestrian, or as needed for mission-critical support. The university will prioritize properties for acquisition if a specific mission-supporting use has been identified for the property long-term. The university will also consider the financial impacts of holding property, including minimizing the university's long-term financial liability, both in terms of capital and operating costs for the interim use. And acquisitions and dispositions should include pro formas or cost-benefit analyses over identified time horizons for those land holdings. And finally, property may be acquired to provide benefit and enhancement to the local area. Property may be disposed of for similar reasons. In limited instances, property may also be acquired in an effort to preclude conflicting uses that negatively impact adjacent campus properties. As Senior Vice President Franz noted at the beginning of the presentation, these draft principles will be refined based upon the direction we received today, consulted with the university community, and if desired by the committee, return as proposed amendments to the Board of Regents policies, property and facilities use at a future meeting. And that concludes our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senior Vice President Franz and Assistant Vice President Krieger. At this time, I'd like to open this topic up for discussion. I think that it would be helpful for us to hear from each other, but also for the administration to hear. Number one, do we think these principles that they are proposing, are they adequate to guide the university on dispositions or acquisitions? Do we think they need to be more specific? Do they need to be more general? Trying to get a reaction from them. Those principles, I think, would be helpful to the administration. And second, do we think it would be helpful to, whatever we arrive at, to formalize it with modifications to the current policy on acquisitions and disposition, again, so that the administration and we will have guiding principles as we look at certain opportunities, either to dispose of property or to acquire property. Seems to me giving input on these items would be helpful to not only each other, but in particular to Senior Vice President Franz and Vice President Krieger as they go forward working on these principles. So with that, any comments, questions, input by any of those present here? Yes, Regent Sviggum.
Madam Chair, thank you. I just quickly want to state to VP Kruger and to VP Franz that I think the guiding principle around the strategic value is so very, very important. Property has to have value to us, and it has to fit our mission. And I would think that this principle will help us not only acquire land that has value, but also dispose of land that doesn't have value, that we can take resources and put into the value properties we need. So I just want to compliment you and enhance and support strongly the strategic value principle.
All right, Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Perhaps, following that commentary, this may be a bit of a contrast. One of the things that I looked in the proposed language, or in the discussion about, I was looking for something that talked about the ability to position the university in future boards for success. When you look at the history of the University of Minnesota, the folks that had the foresight to establish the university a century and a half ago, they made a lot of decisions knowing that they were not going to be able to act on the resources or to employ the resources immediately. The campus actually sat dormant for quite some time before it was eventually built into an academic center and then into the remarkably complex and productive and impactful institution that it is today. And so, again, just trying to sit in the seat of regents in, whether it's in this room or another room 50 years from now, recognizing the unique character of the flagship campus in the Twin Cities, and even our campuses around the state. Duluth has got some real challenges being somewhat landlocked, and there would have been times perhaps that the campus could have acquired undeveloped land around it, but at the time wasn't seeing some of the prospects for the future. So recognizing, and maybe it's just simply a matter of placing a value, that this would be consistent with Regent Svigum's commentary when he says it has to have value. I put a tremendous amount of value when you talk about a public institution of this variety. There's a tremendous amount of value in knowing that we don't know all that will come up in the future, in that putting ourselves in a position, putting our future, our successors as members of the Board of Regents into a position to be able to react and develop the institution for the future, I think is a tremendous value and something that I would like to see reflected in the language. That it doesn't necessarily have to be ready for a shovel immediately, but that working with the community, being sensible about the resources, but also putting future regents in a position to continue to develop and evolve the institution. I think that's very important and something I'd like to see in the language if we are going to make any changes. Thank you.
Rocha, Regent Farnsworth.
Thank you, Chair Mayron. Just two comments. One, to answer one of the questions that you posed for consideration. Yes, I would definitely be supportive of seeing this come back in an amendment to Regents policy. I think that codification is important in order to make sure that these have teeth to them and long-term sustainability to, as you pointed out, help the board and help the administration in a shared expectations sort of way. The second thing is, after listening to Regent Rocha's comments, I think that leaving room for flexibility to adapt to flexibility and opportunity when it comes to real estate acquisitions, I think is really important. So I'd like to second that. And then I guess third, just overall, thank the administration, everyone who worked on this for bringing these, after joining the board and dealing with the most kind of recent, more robust real estate transaction that we dealt with. I was a little concerned about if everyone was going to be like that. Really grateful that we're discussing this and we'll have this in place, on this timeline that we're discussing here, because I think this is going to be really critical. So thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments by any regents? Yes, Chair Powell.
Thank you, Chair Mayron. Just wanted to maybe make a comment on the principles and particularly sort of long-term, land holdings, and which Regent Rocha raises, which I think is it's a difficult and challenging issue. The way I look at it is, I think that the boundary around clear strategic purpose is a really important one, and I know that that's one that I will focus on. I think that adjacencies, adjacent lands, expansion land for existing resources, it's also, I think, a good one that we can all nod our head to and say, yep, we want to have room, where we're already existing. That's a good one. But then beyond that, I think the board, needs to be, and we will be open to opportunistic opportunities that, come upon us suddenly. And the Masonic Institute, may not be the very best example of that, but it is an example of the board really out of the blue, realizing that we had an opportunity to acquire land and facilities that previously is nowhere, it's in the city, but it's really not close. But we did that, and we saw the opportunity and we did that. And these principles would certainly allow for that kind of, opportunistic movement, which ended up being very strategic. So I guess that's how I look at it. Linkage to strategy and purpose is really important for me. And when you get too far beyond that, I worry that we get into the land holding business, which I would be wary of.
Thank you. Thank you. Regent Davenport.
Thank you, Chair Mayron, and I want to weigh in support of these principles. I think that they do look into the future, and it also reinforces, I think, those comments made by others, the importance of master plans, and that they do need to be visionary and look at boundaries and other aspects of campus needs in life. I want to also emphasize number 3, looking at the value and the balance. That balance piece is challenging to either our current board or future boards, I'd say, because there can be some tough decisions made as you look at things that we want to have that may be limited by scarce resources and are want-to-haves versus must-haves. Anyway, I like these 4 principles, and I look forward to seeing them move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments by fellow regents? All right, I will share, at least from my own viewpoint, I do think that it would be important to have ultimately these end up in a policy that would help guide our board and future boards as well. So I think the movement towards ultimately getting them into written policy for the regents to consider, I personally would support. And with that, if there are no other comments, then we are going to take a 10-minute break. It is right now 2:06 p.m., so we will resume at 2:16 p.m. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah.
Ruth, you know Gertie Truman Scholar. Gertie Truman Scholar.
All right, we are resuming the Finance and Operations meeting. I therefore call this committee meeting back to order. I'm going to use my prerogative as chair and keep us in the real estate realm by taking up item 5, which is our real estate transaction first, and then we will move back to item 4, which is the update on university operations. This will allow Vice President Krieger to complete her presentations and go on to do other things if she'd like. All right. So the real estate transaction before us is review and action of the purchase of 814 Essex Street Southeast, Minneapolis. Assistant Vice President Krieger, please proceed.
Thank you, Chair Mayron, members of the committee. And we now have an opportunity to put those draft principles right into action. And I will say that I do have a consent agenda item on the as well, so I will be sticking around. So
okay, all right.
But thank you for the consideration. The property is located on Block 11, across the street from Oak Street parking ramp and adjacent to the university's parking lot, serving the clinics and surgery center. And most importantly, it's right down the block from Frontier Hall, where I moved my oldest child into last week during move-in. So I want to point that out as well. The property consists of a 6,600 square foot lot, improved with a fraternity house and an asphalt parking lot. The property is currently owned by the Theta Auxiliary Educational Association, known as the Delta Sigma Delta Dental Fraternity. As we discussed just a few minutes ago during our review of the draft strategic principles for real estate transactions, we always start by asking the question, what is the strategic value to the university in acquiring the property? This property is one of 2 remaining lots on Block 11 that are not owned by the university. Block 11 has been identified as the proposed site of the university's future clinical research facility, now known as the Health Discovery Hub. And as you will note on this slide, we are attempting to articulate how a specific real estate transaction aligns with the draft principles that we just discussed. In this case, the acquisition directly aligns with 3 of the 4 principles. First, acquisitions must support the university's educational research and service mission. In this case, the Health Discovery Hub directly supports all 3 components of the university's mission and several action items in MPACT 25. Future acquisitions and dispositions should be contemplated in the campus master plans. This property was identified in the 2009 Twin Cities Campus Master Plan for future acquisition and is also identified in the upcoming master plan that you will be reviewing in October. And finally, the university will prioritize properties for acquisition if a specific mission supporting use has been identified for the property long-term. And as I already noted, this site has been identified as the future location of the proposed Health Discovery Hub. The university will purchase the property from the fraternity for $1,605,000, which is consistent with the university's independent appraisal of the property. Delta Sigma Delta has simultaneously negotiated to purchase 632 Ontario Street from the Alpha Chi Sigma fraternity for their future home. At close, the university will pay an additional $100,000 to Delta Sigma Delta to assist in their renovations of 632 Ontario Street. The university will issue debt to fund the purchase of the property. Bond proceeds from new debt are to be issued in September in conjunction with the refinancing of university debt. The estimated closing date is September 30th, 2021 for both properties. It is for this reason, and given that the board had recently approved similar acquisitions on this block, that we are requesting review and action this month rather than over the course of 2 board meetings as per regular procedure. And at the time of closing, the university will ground lease the property back to Delta Sigma Delta for a nominal rent so that the fraternity may have time to complete the renovations at their new property. The university has also pledged to use good faith efforts to identify a chapter room on campus for Alpha Chi Sigma and negotiate a market rate lease for such space. And with that, I conclude my overview of this transaction and stand for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Assistant Vice President Krieger. Before we start our discussion, is there a motion to recommend approval of the purchase of 814 Essex Street Southeast, Minneapolis? Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing no, and seeing no hands raised and seeing no indication here in the boardroom of any individual who would like to discuss the item, it appears that we are ready to vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, please say no. The motion is approved. Thank you very much, Vice President Krieger.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And now at this time, we will jump back to item 4. And this is our discussion on the ongoing impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on university operations. Vice Presidents Ken Horstman, Bernie Gulchek, and Mike Bertelsen will take us through the proposal, or will take us through the ongoing impacts. And I think at this time, Vice President Horstman, you are going to be leading us off. Is that correct? When you get seated.
Thank you, Chair Mayron.
Thank you.
Regents and student representatives for the opportunity to talk about the ongoing nature of our operations as a result of the pandemic. We will be speaking today about the areas of information technology and university services. First, we are going to start with the context around our effort to look at how we work with presence and purpose in the future in a hybrid fashion that has been an outcome of the pandemic. So I will just start this part of the conversation by talking about hybrid work environments briefly. They have always been here in one way or another. I think there is a misconception that this has happened recently. It is either or, remote or fully in person. And in fact, over many years, there have been examples of hybrid work. Faculty, for one example, may be a perfect look at how hybrid work has been undertaken in the past, even while that term was not applied. They teach in person, they meet with their students in person, they have research in person on campus. But very often their mission and their research takes them far away, or for different periods of the year, they may be working in another location. So in essence, that's what we're talking about as one example of hybrid work. When we look at it in a planful way, it really is a definition of space and time. Where are you working? What is your space? What is the location? And then is your time fixed or flexible? And there are spectrums along the way for both. So when we talk about how a university or different units work in this context, the term hybrid really refers to an entire office, an entire academic unit, a campus, and how all those different modalities and locations of work come together with the connection they need to have and the presence they need to have to serve our students, to serve our community, and to accomplish our mission. With that context, human resources started to meet at the end of 2020 and into 2021 across the system. So we had many different academic and administrative units, campuses engaged in this conversation along with our central office. And the conversation was really looking at the achievements that had occurred as a result of the pandemic in what was not a very planful but a reactive way. I mean, we were all out of here within 36 hours of the decision. And we found as we went along a way to react to different urgent crises with opportunities and become aware of those opportunities and take advantage of them. But as you move forward and you want this to be sustainable, you need a strategy, we need a philosophy, we need a plan in order to do this in the most purposeful way. So with that in mind, the university's human resources community came together to establish what we thought would be a broad strategy that could apply locally at the university. And out of the gate, we decided to establish some guiding principles that would ground us. And that was, above all, the type of work should determine the kind of flexibility that aligns with the position. That the most senior leaders in each college or unit or campus should be accountable to define how flexible work, how a hybrid work environment based on the university's guidance would apply to their location, to their unit. And that any decisions about flexible work must advance our efforts toward a more equitable, diverse, and inclusive workspace. To move that forward, the human resource initial work in this area has established guidance that considers employment law, areas like workers' compensation. When is it a good idea to consider allowing someone to work outside the state of Minnesota? Typically, you would not probably hear that at the University of Minnesota, but in certain labor markets, that's a consideration we may have. And employees we want to retain have life events that may take them beyond Minnesota for a temporary period of time. How do we handle that? How do we stay in compliance with federal regulations like the Fair Labor Standards Act? All those considerations were taken into account, and a broad set of guidance was established that has to be consistent across the university. Within that guidance, there is plenty of freedom for individual units and leaders to outline their own approach in creating a more flexible environment within the bounds of this guidance. And that is based on the type of work that takes place in their campus, college, or unit. They are the ones that understand the work in front of them. They are the ones that should make those decisions and can interact with their faculty and staff to make the right decisions. Also critical in this are supervisors. Supervisors are charged with implementing the outcome of our work with flexibility initiative. They need support to do that well. They will be asked to do things that maybe historically they have not been comfortable with in the past. They'll have to look at work a little differently, and that will take training and support, but they are critical to this being accomplished successfully. Some of the benefits of working with flexibility for the university are the same as with other employers. Nationally, many employers and human resource consultants are predicting that if flexibility and work from home options are not available as we come out of the pandemic, that will cause employees to consider other opportunities, resign from their current positions and move to where they may have more adaptability and flexibility. And so not having these options could potentially create a disadvantage in recruiting for an employer. Additionally, how we reconsider our use of campus and other spaces, particularly offices, is very important, as was referred to earlier today. We don't know today what our office space situation will be in 2 years, but this process we're going through, connected with the work of SVP France's organization, will certainly lead us in the right direction to determine that. The other piece of this is around students. There are services students receive from our staff, obviously, as well as faculty, and allowing some adaptability and flexibility could allow students to receive these services over a more continual period of time, even into the evening or weekends in some cases. So as we look at this, we are actually looking at it as a project. We established guidance that was provided to leaders in supervision in June. By July 19th, we had set a date where We suggested that leaders have an initial plan for how they would approach the fall semester and present that to their units by August 2nd. Honestly, different leaders are in a different place about this currently. Just like any new thought, it can take a while to adopt and to become comfortable with it. And so we have looked at this coming year as a test drive or a pilot where we are going to go up a learning curve, and likely what we established for the initial program will be adjusted as we go along. Obviously, with the Delta variant and a number of challenges that occurred in the month of August, that allowed us to be a little agile and have a little softer start than August 2nd. But we are now in the process of returning to campus in many offices in a hybrid mode, and we will continue that into the fall. As we get through the fall, there will be periods of time where we stop and evaluate how the program is going system-wide. Where are there examples of what we think are best practices that can be shared? And the purpose of that evaluation is so that going into 2022 and the following year, we can have a more mature, sustainable program in regard to hybrid work. The evaluation of this will be through the engagement survey, which is occurring in October. We have retention data that we compile and can review, and that will be correlated to this factor of hybrid work. And we will also adopt considerations for how this improves equity or allows for equity across our employee population. The other thing I would say is we have established an evaluation committee beyond human resources that involves a lot of our counterparts and other administrative roles across the university and other stakeholders. So it will be a broad and integrated review of the program to see where units need support that may be struggling with it and where units are succeeding, and we may want to adopt some of their practices more broadly. So with that, I will turn it to Vice President Gladchuk to talk about information technologies.
Thank you, Vice President Horstman. Chair Mayron, members of the committee. University of Minnesota technologists have been laser focused on maintaining the continuity of instruction, research, and business operations since the pivot to remote instruction and work activities began 16 months ago. As the university returns to in-person, on-campus instruction, technologists have shifted their focus to creating and supporting a hybrid environment where place-based instruction and work activities are more elegantly balanced with those same activities that continue remotely. While the technology pivot that occurred on March 18th, 2020 was smooth, it would have been done differently if we had the foresight of knowing that the volume of remote activities would be as high as we forecast them to be for the foreseeable future. It's with that context, Madam Chair and committee members, that the adjustments that you see itemized are occurring as an ongoing impact to COVID-19 technology operations. More specifically, technologists are in the process of adjusting hybrid learning environments. That includes enabling instructors with the ability to share audio and video from the classroom to those attending remotely. It also includes modifying and adjusting courses delivered through the learning management system to that elegant place-based and remote balance. Room and Zoom training sessions with instructors were and continue to be very well attended. Technologists are also in the process of adjusting to a hybrid technology infrastructure. As remote learning and work continues for the foreseeable future, infrastructure adjustments need to be made to accommodate university computers that are accessing systems that are not primarily on a university managed network. These adjustments include increasing virtual private networking, firewalling, network load balancing, and the use of cloud infrastructure. Thirdly, technologists are in the process of adjusting information security controls. Information security is best performed through a layered approach that involves people, process, and technologies. There is no one magic mechanism other than absence that will protect our data. The threat landscape has changed over the last 16 months. And this changed COVID operational reality necessitates increased two-factor authentication, endpoint computer and device management, firewalling, and vulnerability management mitigating activities. Fourthly, technologists are adjusting to users' expectations. The wave of both staff and faculty returning to our campuses just recently has created a pronounced demand on our support services for the myriad of reasons that were outlined in your docket materials. The teams are managing through this volume of demand, knowing full well that swift answers or fixes to problems have a direct correlation to that individual's and therefore the institution's productivity. At the same time that these dynamics are occurring, the technology market conditions mirror the employment conditions that you've read about or witnessed yourselves. In addition to the supply chain issues that you've seen or witnessed that are related to manufacturing, we are also experiencing supply chain challenges related to the acquisition of information technology talent. We acutely experienced this challenge as we began the process to staff the helpline with students this summer. The information technology management function is itself experiencing its highest rate of attrition in the 6 years that I've been in this role, an annualized rate of 15%. The new COVID operational reality is that technology staff can flip badges without flipping seats, achieving East and West Coast salaries while living and now working remotely in the Midwest. The obvious impact to the institution is greater competition for talent and reduced university service levels in areas where staff shortages are most pronounced. Technologists continue to work hand in hand with university business and finance professionals to adopt technologies that facilitate business in a remote environment. Purchasing and supply chain management, cash handling, and research financial administration policies, procedures, and supporting technologies were adapted quickly to allow finance professionals across the system for continuity of business operations. Finally, the university's reliance on its information systems to conduct its mission have never been more obvious than in the last 16 months. The pandemic has changed operations in significant ways that underscore this reliance with no end in sight. So in summary, Chair Mayron, members of the committee, the COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated the natural evolution of the use of technologies at this institution by 10 or more years. We are now living in the future that we forecasted. Never before has it been as challenging or as exciting to be a technologist. Madam Chair, members of the committee, with your permission, I turn the presentation over to Vice President Bertelsen.
Thank you. Vice President Bertelsen.
Madam Chair and members, the changes due to COVID for university services on the Twin Cities campus have been many and significant through the last 18 months, with many of our employees being, because it's a place-based role, many of those employees have stayed on campus and made adjustments to our campus operations during that time. Many of these changes that they have put in place to make it continue to be a safe place for people to work and learn continue to be in place as we enter this new academic year, whether they be cleaning standards, increased air exchange and air filtration, and many other service delivery adjustments to make the campus continue to be accessible to students, staff, visitors, patients, and more. For the next few minutes, I'll give you some of the newer adjustments that we are making this fall and realities as we look forward. In parking, we are offering a new part-time parking program to accommodate the hybrid work model that Vice President Horstman was talking about. This will allow us to serve and provide new support opportunities for those who are coming to campus less often, while also being able to sell more contracts for the existing same facilities, allowing more people to move through the wait list and get to the locations that are more convenient for their work. The true impact of our ongoing operations is yet to be determined as people are determining what that new work standard for them will be, and we will continue to adapt as we see that. In addition, outside of our realm, but still related to a responsibility we have, is for transit. Metro Transit has reduced the cost of the U-Pass, which is for our students' bus passes, and the Metro Pass for faculty and staff by half for the fall semester as they try to get people back onto public transportation, and we are supporting those efforts. In dining, the biggest challenge we have is relates to the employment and the market, as both my colleagues here have identified in their areas. We are having great difficulty in hiring food service workers and cooks, and hiring enough students is also a concern. This is of course not just a local but a national issue. Our highest staffing priority is and will continue to be making sure we can meet the residential dining and meet those needs of the students that live with us. Staffing shortages in dining will be filled by temporarily closing or restricting retail locations and assigning those students and staff to residential dining locations to make sure we can maintain that core delivery expectation and our requirement. With fewer employees on campus full-time and with a hybrid work model, the true impact of retail and catering is yet to be determined, as well as we see how this fall semester unrolls. In New Market Services, which is sort of our campus delivery system, is our Amazon for campus. We have been working toward discussing a centralized logistics program for several years. The primary goal is to reduce the number of deliveries and vehicles moving around campus. COVID really accelerated that as we locked down buildings for several months. And so as we return to more normal operations, many of our buildings continue to be card access only. And so during COVID, New Market Services became the receiving and delivery for all packages centrally from places like FedEx, UPS, Amazon, et cetera, to a central location by which they then collected, and our staff had access to the buildings to deliver all of those packages, plus our normal materials supplies through the campus and get them to the right departments in the right location. There is, of course, some additional cost for staff and equipment to do this added level of service, but we believe there's a net positive to the campus for efficiency and vehicle reduction. This pivot to online has also accelerated the reduction in printing demand, both from a course materials perspective as well as daily operations. Other impacts we think are maybe more temporary in nature. Our bookstore is doing online ordering and delivering a pickup for students, an activity we will see how that progresses over time. Housing and residential life is continuing to hold isolation and quarantine rooms in residence halls should we need those services, which we hope won't, but we are prepared for that possibility. We are also prepared this fall as students came back to campus for a significantly larger number of U cards for both first-year students and students from last year and this year's first-year students to pick up their new U cards and to be able to use them on campus. Housing residential life continues to use the student conduct process to enforce face covering policies as consistent with the rest of the campus. And finally, we are still incurring additional costs to run our HVAC systems longer and harder than normal and for a length of term which we can't yet predict, but we are making sure we're following things like CDC, ASHRAE standards in the delivery to the extent our buildings can meet those goals. This ends our presentation. We are glad to take any of your questions.
Thank you, Vice Presidents Horstman, Baluchik, and Bertelsen. Nothing like a pandemic to create what you would say are both challenges and opportunities, and to move us on a fast forward basis, as I think you commented, to 10 years, what we might have expected 10 years from now and we are having to address now. It is, from my own perspective, truly remarkable how the impact that COVID has had on so many aspects of our lives, but you really see it here in your operations presentation. I thank you for educating us on this. With that, any comments or questions by my colleagues? Yes, Chair Powell.
Thank you, Chair Mayron, and thank you. I mean, I think it's really good that you guys have taken the opportunity to reflect on what just happened and try to, and collect our thoughts and distill. So just a couple of thoughts. I mean, all of us driving through campus over the last few days, I think it's been hard not to feel kind of the joy. I mean, everybody, we just spent a year in basements, looking at TV screens, and we didn't like it. And now we're back and we're part of this community. And, and the students here, you have the privilege of being a full-time student on a sort of multi-year thing. It's that's what they want. And so the point of that little commentary is that I do think that this is a very, very high touch sort of service that we're delivering, and people who are here, I mean, being in the community is really important to learn, to be coached, to be guided. And as we kind of learn and figure out, how else we can apply technology and the flexibility that gives us, we just have to be really careful that we don't erode the value of the service that we're delivering. And look, I get technology. We all understand it. We all know how powerful it is, and the world's changing. But this particular model, I think people are here because they want to be part of the community, and we just have to be careful. And so I guess that's the plea, is that we monitor what we're doing, that we're not eroding the value, and we know when we've gone too far.
Thank you, Chair Powell. Any other comments or questions by any of the other regents? All right, hearing none, thank you very much for this presentation. Very, very educational for us all. All right, that takes us to item number 6, which is review and action on 2 collective bargaining agreements. We will take each agreement individually. And first, I'm going to have Vice President Horstman walk us through the proposed agreement with the Minnesota Teamsters Public and Law Enforcement Employees Union, Local 320. But before you start, Vice President Horstman, Regent Farnsworth has asked to speak. Regent Farnsworth.
Thank you, Chair Mayron. Just making a brief statement for the record and for the minutes as well. Due to a conflict of interest I have with the Minnesota Teamsters Public and Law Enforcement Employees Union Local 320. I'm following advice from our General Counsel. I'm going to be recusing myself from this discussion and vote, and we'll be back for the University Education Association discussion and vote. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We'll wait until you exit the room and then we'll proceed. All right, before we start our discussion, is there a motion to recommend approval of the resolution related to the proposed labor agreement with the Minnesota Teamsters Public and Law Enforcement Employees Union Local 320?
So moved.
Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion on the motion? All right, hearing and seeing no indication of discussion, it appears everybody is ready to vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
All those opposed, please say no. Hearing no no's, the motion is approved. Thank you. At this time, if one of you could ask Regent Farnsworth to come back in. And let me just apologize to Vice President Horstman before we go to the second motion. I actually was supposed to allow you to do a short presentation on what we voted, but as you can see, all of my colleagues read all their materials and knew exactly what they were voting on, and apparently didn't require you to do a presentation. So I apologize.
Chair Mayron, I'm trying to work with flexibility. So, Yeah,
And you-
I am good with it. I can roll with it.
All right, you will need all the flexibility you can muster, and I'll give you twice the amount of time for the second one.
Okay.
All right, Vice President Horstman, back to you for our second agreement with the University Education Association. At this time, we are open to our presentation on this matter.
Thank you, Chair Mayron, regents, student representatives. First, I would like to, on the prior agreement, just recognize the negotiating team members from Teamsters Local 320 and the University of Minnesota for their diligence and commitment to continue to meet on behalf of the Teamster represented employees at our university, of which there are 1,265, to reach this agreement. Their dedication was very much appreciated. And now in regard to UEA, this is the second agreement today between the University Education Association and the University of Minnesota. The employees covered by this collective bargaining agreement are instructional staff located at the University of Minnesota Duluth and the University of Minnesota Crookston, included in University of Minnesota Unit 9 as defined by the Minnesota Public Employee Labor Relations Act. And the total current population in UEA at this time is 556. It's a 2-year agreement effective June 21st of this year and will run through June 30th of 2023. Negotiations began on May 18th of this year, and a tentative agreement was reached on August 5th with member ratification on August 27th. This agreement includes a 1.5% increase for the first year and a salary adjustment for year 2 that aligns with the university's 2022 salary memo. The university and UEA agree under this agreement to collaborate on a market review of UMD faculty salary, which will start in year 1 of this agreement. Our Office of Human Resources and our compensation staff will be working with UMD leadership and UEA to conduct that survey. And we will have updates on that in progress as we go forward later into this year. I do want to recognize again the negotiating teams from UEA and the university for their respective commitments to bargain to a 2-year agreement. There have been challenging times in these negotiations over the past year, but the professionalism, candor, and respect that was shown this summer during negotiations is really something we can build on, and I laud President Wright and our Labor Relations Manager, Karen Wallin, for leading that effort. And I look forward to working with UEA as we go forward. So with that, Chair Mayron, I will stand for any questions and ask for approval of this agreement.
Thank you. Before we start our discussion, is there a motion to recommend approval of the resolution related to the proposed labor agreement with the University Education Association?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion at this time on this particular resolution? All right, seeing no indication of questions or discussion, we will take the matter up for a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. All those opposed, please say no. The motion is approved. Thank you very much, Vice President Horstman. And that takes us now to the consent report. First, Senior Vice President Franz will summarize the items in today's revised consent report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, we have purchase of goods and services in the amount of over $1 million. There are 4 of those in total listed in your materials, giving the reasons and for the reasons for those purchases. We have 3 capital budget amendments, which are in your proposals, in your materials for the Morris Community Softball Complex, Stadium Village Apartment Fire Suppression System, and the East Cliff Drive and Gate improvements. We have a total of 1 new facilities use agreement going along with the Morris campus and the shared softball fields and facilities. We have the schematic designs. We have 2 total, 1 for Murphy Hall and 1 for the main energy plant, the chilled water build out. And then finally, we have one employment agreement to consider in the consent report. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you very much, Senior Vice President Franz. I will note that Regent Rocha has requested that the employment agreement for Julie Tonneson be voted on separately. So we will take that item up after the remaining items on the consent report. Before we do that, is there anyone that would like to ask a question, make a comment, or separate any of the other items from the report to be voted on separately before I invite a motion to recommend approval of the rest of the consent report? All right, hearing no questions or comments or requests for separation of any other items, is there a motion to recommend approval of the consent report excluding the employment agreement of Julie Tonneson?
Move it.
Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Any discussion, further discussion on those items in the consent report? Hearing no discussion, we will take a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, please say no. The motion is approved. All right, then with respect to the Julie Tonneson agreement, what I would like to do is entertain a motion for approval. And if there is a motion and a second, then we will open it up. And then Regent Rocha, you will be able to address your issues with respect to that motion. Is there a motion?
I'll move on that.
Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second to approve the employment agreement for Julie Tonneson. Any discussion? Regent Rocha, why don't we start with you?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be quick. These are always a challenge because the first opportunity to see or know that these matters are before us or come when the docket is released. So this is the only avenue for the discussion. First, I want to say that I think that Vice President Tonneson is a remarkable contributor, excellent at the position, and absolutely the right person to be in this leadership position. The challenge that I have is as I think most of you who've served with me for some time know, is that this constitutes roughly I think something close to a 20% increase in the compensation for this position. It wasn't really clear in the report if there were any cost savings as a result of the designation and the contract. I looked at it with respect to other public institutions in this state in surrounding areas, and it's substantially more than what you'd find the state legislative auditor and other public auditing or other public positions of a similar nature. And so to that extent, I think the huge challenge that we have as an institution is affordability and access. I think we've seen this for 30 years, that the cost of higher education has gotten, has become dramatic. And we are sitting at a table where we have an impact on that. We talk about it, we talk about the challenges, but when we have individual votes, we all seem to walk directly into the wrong direction, I think. So my intent is to abstain from voting. The challenge is that we're voting both with respect to the individual, but also with respect to the contract. And again, not that I don't believe that the individual is well worth it. It has to do with the public nature of this institution and our need to address the cost that continues to be leveled toward students. And so I will not be voting in favor of this contract, but I greatly appreciate the contributions that Vice President Tonneson makes to the university. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Rocha. Senior Vice President Franz, would you like to speak with respect to this employment agreement that would appoint Ms. Tonneson as Vice President and Budget Director?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like that very much. I would like to, first of all, make it clear the nature of this position. It's unusual in some universities, but the nature of this position is significant and has changed over time. The Vice President and Budget Director is responsible for advancing the excellence of the university by developing, aligning, integrating, and managing budget and finance strategies through a coordinated approach for the University of Minnesota system and all of its campuses, serving key stakeholders in the university's leadership, the Board of Regents, academic and support leaders and financial managers, faculty and staff, executive and legislative branches of the state of Minnesota, and the general public. The Vice President plans, implements, and communicates all aspects of the annual operating budget, serving as the director and direct advisor to the President and the Senior Vice President for Finance and Operations, and leading to the enterprise review of over 50 academic and administrative resource responsibility centers across the institution, and I'm not seeing very well, I'm sorry, and the annual budget process. A key member of the leadership team, Vice President develops the biennial budget request to the state of Minnesota for the institution's state appropriations, including serving as liaison with the Office of Minnesota Management and Budget and providing testimony to the legislature upon request. Finally, the Vice President maintains all procedures, education, communication, and calculations related to the responsibility center management budget model and manages institutional level financial activities, including but not limited to the Central Reserves Fund, General Ledger, attribution of tuition, enterprise assessment decisions, and fringe benefit rates. As part of Julie Tonnisson's promotion recommendation to the board to Vice President Budget Director, which would be effective September 13, 2021, the Office of Human Resources Compensation Department conducted a market evaluation to determine the appropriate base salary for this position. Julie has worked for the university since 1993 and has been promoted consistently throughout her university career to the Assistant Budget Director and most recently Associate Vice President and Budget Director. As the nature of the higher education environment has evolved over time, Julie has played a more visible leadership role and impact across the system, identifying more creative ways to enhance revenue streams and reduce costs. She plays a critical leadership role at the university, from the annual operating budget, annual budget request, and the budget model to the management of institutional financial activities in the university budget office. Julie's expertise and guidance during the COVID-19 pandemic has also been invaluable. Based on the assessment of Julie's performance and her deep expertise with the university's unique budgeting model and requirements, we are recommending a salary of $240,000, which represents the market value of the 76th percentile. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senior Vice President Franz. Any further comments or questions on the motion?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate Vice President Franz's presentation. I realize that I misspoke. I think I referred to auditor. I meant to say budget director. I'll demur to all those points. There's no question that everything that Vice President Franz said is true. It still comes back to the point that we have a tremendous challenge. On each individual point, we can certainly reach a justification or a validation of why we would continue to have these increases. The problem is the sum of all of these decisions leads to a situation where we've got some affordability problems, especially compared to some of our regional peers of similar quality and rank. And so from that standpoint, I reassert my initial point that we have to stop the increases on this side of the ledger in order to ensure that we have that access on the other side. And so for that reason, I'll be abstaining. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Regent Rocha. Any other comments, questions on the motion? All right, hearing no further discussion, we will take up the motion. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, please say no.
Madam Chair, I abstain.
And Regent Rocha abstains. The motion is approved with Regent Rocha abstaining. That brings us to the final item, which is the information item. Senior Vice President Franz, anything to highlight here?
Madam Chair, thank you. No, the items are listed in the report and in the materials, and there's no additional material to report. Thank you.
All right. Then with that, that concludes the meeting of the Finance and Operations Committee. Thank you very much, everyone. The meeting is adjourned.